Solve 5x minus 6 equals 3 multiplied by x minus 1. So when doing questions like this, the best way to start it off is expanding out this bracket. So we want to multiply this 3 by the x and then by the negative 1. So 3 multiplied by x will be 3x, and then 3 multiplied by negative 1 will give us negative 3. So now in order to solve this equation, we're going to want to get x on one side on its own. So the next thing we can do is we can add 6 to both sides of this equation. And this will give us 5x, and then negative 6 plus 6 will just give us 0, is equal to 3x minus 3 plus 6. And now negative 3 plus 6 will give us positive 3. Now the next thing we can do is we can minus 3x from both sides of this equation. And this will give us 5x minus 3x is equal to 3. And 5x minus 3x will give us 2x. And this is all equal to 3. Now the final thing we'll need to do to get a value for x will be divide both sides of this equation by 2. So 2 multiplied by x divided by 2 will give us x, and then 3 divided by 2 will give us 3 over 2. So x equals 3 over 2 is our final answer. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get our first mark for expanding out these brackets, our second mark for having the numerical terms on one side of the equation, and then our final mark for the correct answer. Emily buys a pack of 12 bottles of water. The pack costs £5.64. Emily sells all 12 bottles for 50p each. Work out Emily's percentage profit. Give your answer correct to one decimal place. So in order to work out the percentage profit, what we can do is work out how much she spent on each water bottle. So if the pack of water bottles cost £5.64 and there were 12 bottles of water in there, then if we do 5.64 divided by 12, then this will tell us the price of the individual bottles of water. So if we put 5.64 divided by 12 into our calculator, this will give us an answer of 0.47. Now £0.47 is equal to 47p. So if she sells her water bottles for 50p and she bought them for 47p, then this means that her profit on each water bottle was 3 pence. So in order to work out Emily's percentage profit, we can do the amount of profit she made from each water bottle divided by the original cost of the water bottle, which is 3 divided by 47. And this will give us an answer of 0.0638 to 3 significant figures. Now as we can see, this answer is being given in a decimal. So in order to make it a percentage, we're going to want to multiply it by 100. And this will give us a final answer of 6.38%. And now the final thing we need to do for this question is give our answer correct to one decimal place. So 6.38 can be rounded up to 6.4%, because this 8 is greater than or equal to 5. So our final answer is 6.4%. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get 1 mark for comparing the price of the individual bottles. We'll get a second mark for using a suitable method to work out the percentage profit. And we'll get our third mark for the correct answer to one decimal point. Hasmeet walks once round a circle with diameter 80 metres. There are 8 points equally spaced on the circumference of the circle. Find the distance Hasmeet walks between one point and the next point. So Hasmeet will be walking around the circumference of the circle, So what we're going to want to work out is what the circumference of the circle is. So the circumference of a circle is equal to pi multiplied by the diameter. So in the question we've been told that the circle has a diameter of 80 metres. So what this means is this circle has a circumference of pi multiplied by 80. So 80 pi metres would be the distance that Hasmeet would walk if he walked the full circumference of this circle. However, we want to work out the distance between one point and the next point. So this is just one section out of the 8. So we're going to want to divide our answer by 8 to work out the length of one section, and this gives us an answer of 10 pi. Now we can leave our answer as 10 pi, or we can rewrite it as a decimal by pressing the change button on our calculator. And this will give us an answer of 31.42 to 2 decimal places. And this will be our final answer. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for working out the circumference of the full circle, and the second mark for the correct answer. 4 of the points are moved as shown in the diagram below. Hasmeet walks once round the circle again. Has the mean distance that Hasmeet walks between one point and the next point changed? You must give a reason for your answer. So we want to know if the mean distance that Hasmeet has walked between one point and the next point has changed. So we worked out in part A that the circumference of this circle will be 80 pi metres. Now when working out the mean, we add together each of these individual distances and then divide it by the number of lengths that there are. So if we were to add together each of these distances, we'd still get an answer of 80 pi, despite the fact that 4 of the points have moved. And there are still 8 points on this circle, meaning we'd still be dividing 80 pi by 8, meaning that the mean will still remain the same. So no, the mean distance that Hasmeet walks between one point and the next point will not have changed because the number of points and the circumference of the circle has stayed the same. There are only blue cubes, yellow cubes and green cubes in a bag. There are twice as many blue cubes as yellow cubes and 4 times as many green cubes as blue cubes. Hannah takes at random a cube from the bag. Work out the probability that Hannah takes a yellow cube. So there's a few different ways we can do this question, but one of the ways is by forming a ratio from this piece of information. So the first thing the question's told us is there are twice as many blue cubes as yellow cubes. Now if we were to put this into a ratio, what this means is the ratio of blue cubes to yellow cubes will be 2 to 1. Now what this means is for every yellow cube, there will be 2 blue cubes, meaning there are twice as many blue cubes as yellow cubes. Now we can do the same thing for the green and blue cubes. So we've been told there are 4 times as many green cubes as blue cubes. So what this means is the ratio of green cubes to blue cubes will be 4 to 1. So as before, what this means is for every blue cube, there will be 4 green cubes, and therefore 4 times as many green cubes as blue cubes. So now what we're going to want to do is combine these 2 ratios here. Now both these ratios have the blue cubes included in them. However, in order to combine these ratios, we're going to want this number to be the same. So to do this, we can multiply this ratio by 2. Now what this means is for every 8 green cubes, there will be 2 blue cubes. So these 2 ratios are still equivalent, but we can now combine these ratios. So the ratio of green to blue to yellow cubes will now be 8 to 2 to 1. Now we want to work out the probability that Hannah will take a yellow cube. So to help us solve this question, we can make these values the number of cubes in this bag. So what this means is that there will be 8 green cubes in the bag, 2 blue cubes in the bag, 1 yellow cube in the bag, and therefore 11 cubes in the bag in total. So if there's 1 yellow cube in the bag out of a total of 11 cubes, then the probability that Hannah will take out a yellow cube will be 1 over 11. And this will be our final answer. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get our first mark for forming these two ratios at the start, our second mark for combining these two ratios, and our third mark for the correct answer. Rotate trapezium T 180 degrees about the origin. Label the new trapezium A. So the easiest way to do this in an exam is by using tracing paper. So what you would do is place your tracing paper in this area here. Using a pencil, draw over the trapezium T. And you can also draw an arrow so you can see how many degrees you've rotated the paper. And then you're going to want to place your pencil on the origin and then rotate your tracing paper 180 degrees. And after this rotation, your arrow which you have drawn should be pointing downwards. Now after your 180 degree rotation, you should have a trapezium in this top left quadrant here, and it should look something like this. And we've been told to label the new trapezium A. Translate trapezium T by the vector -1, -3. Label the new trapezium B. So with vectors, the top number is our x-axis, and then the bottom number is our y-axis. So if we want to translate this trapezium by this vector, we're going to want to move all of the coordinates to the left by 1 point, and then down by 3 points. So you can either do this in one go, or do it in 2 separate parts. So if we start off with the first point, this is point 2, -1. So first we'll minus 1 from the x-coordinate, which will give us 1, and then minus 3 from the y-coordinate, which will give us -4. And we can draw across here. Next, the coordinate 4, -1. So again we'll minus 1 from the x-coordinate and minus 3 from the y-coordinate, and this will give us the coordinate 3, -4. Next, 5 and -2. So minus 1 from the x-axis and then minus 3 from the y-axis, and this will give us 4, -5. And as you can see, we're starting to form a trapezium shape. So our final point is 2, -2. So again, minus 1 from the x-axis and minus 3 from the y-axis, and this should give us an answer of 1, -5. And now the final thing to do to complete this question is join the crosses which we've drawn. And this is trapezium B. Now this question is worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for correctly drawing trapezium A, and our second mark for correctly drawing trapezium B. P to the power of 3 multiplied by P to the power of x equals P to the power of 9. Find the value of x. So for this question we need to know the algebraic principle that something to the power of x multiplied by the same thing to the power of y will be equal to that number to the power of x plus y. So we can apply this principle to this question. So if we use this rule, this means that P to the power of 3 multiplied by P to the power of x will give us an answer of P to the power of 3 plus x. So if P to the power of 3 multiplied by P to the power of x equals P to the power of 3 plus x, then this means that P to the power of 3 plus x is equal to P to the power of 9. So we can simplify this down to 3 plus x is equal to 9. And then if we minus 3 from both sides, we get an answer of x equals 6. 7 squared to the power of y equals 7 to the power of 10. Find the value of y. So for this question we need to know the algebraic principle that a to the power of x to the power of y is equal to a to the power of x multiplied by y. So again we can apply this rule to this question. So if this is the case, then this means that 7 squared to the power of y will be equal to 7 to the power of 2y. So if 7 squared to the power of y is equal to 7 to the power of 2y, then this means that 7 to the power of 10 is equal to 7 to the power of 2y. And we can simplify this down to 10 is equal to 2y, and this tells us that y is equal to 5. (100 to the power of a multiplied by 1000 to the power of b can be written in the form 10 to the power of w. Show that w equals 2a plus 3b. So if 100 to the power of a multiplied by 1000 to the power of b can be written in the form 10 to the power of w, then this means that 100a multiplied by 1000b equals 10 to the power of w. So now what we need to do is solve this equation. And the way to do this is to write 100 and 1000 as 10 to the power of something. So if we start off with 100, so 100 is equal to 10 squared, so we can rewrite 100a as 10 squared all to the power of a. Next 1000 to the power of b. So 1000 can be rewritten as 10 cubed, and this will all be to the power of b. So now 10 squared to the power of a, because the 10 squared is in the brackets, we'll multiply the powers together. So this will give us 10 to the power of 2a, and then 10 cubed to the power of b will give us 10 to the power of 3b, and this is all equal to 10 to the power of w. Now what we can do is multiply these two numbers together, and 10 to the power of 2a multiplied by 10 to the power of 3b will give us 10 to the power of 2a plus 3b. So therefore 10 to the power of w equals 10 to the power of 2a plus 3b. And what this means is that 2a plus 3b is equal to w. Now this question's worth 2 marks, so we'll get our first mark for rewriting 100a multiplied by 1000b as 10 squared to the power of a multiplied by 10 cubed to the power of b. And we'll get our second mark for showing that w equals 2a plus 3b with the correct reasoning. ABCD is a trapezium. Work out the size of angle CDA. Give your answer correct to 1 decimal place. So the first thing we can do is mark angle CDA onto our diagram so that we know which angle we're working out. So angle CDA is this angle here. So the first thing we can do to make this question easier to solve is by adding a line here. And this gives us a triangle on the right hand side of this trapezium, making this angle a right angle. So the first thing we can start working on is this right angled triangle here. So the first thing we can do is work out the length of the base. And to do this we can use Pythagoras. So Pythagoras' theorem is that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And c squared is always the hypotenuse, which is the longest length. So we can see from this diagram that the line AB will be the hypotenuse of this triangle. So because of this we can rearrange this equation. So we can rearrange it to a squared is equal to c squared minus b squared. And we can start substituting in numbers. So our value for c will be 7.5 centimetres. And then our value for b will be 6 centimetres. And if we put this into our calculator, this tells us that a squared is equal to 20.25. So the final thing we need to do to work out this length is square root both sides of the equation. and this tells us that A is equal to 4.5. So therefore the base of this triangle is 4.5 centimetres. Now next we can move on to this rectangle which we've drawn on the diagram. So opposite lengths in a rectangle are equal in length. Already on the diagram, it tells us that the length of this rectangle is 10 centimetres and the height of this rectangle is 6 centimetres. So what this means is the base of the rectangle will also be 10 centimetres and this length on the right will also be 6 centimetres. So on the diagram we've also been told that the full length of the trapezium is 24 centimetres. So what this means is the base of this right angled triangle on the right hand side of the trapezium will be equal to 24 minus 10 minus 4.5, which is the lengths we worked out for the base of the rectangle and the base of this right angled triangle on the left. And this gives us an answer of 9.5 centimetres. So we can fill this in on our diagram. So now what we can see on this triangle on the right, we have two lengths, which means we can work out one of the angles by using trigonometry. So we want to work out the angle of CDA, so we can label up these sides. So the hypotenuse is always the longest side, and then the side which is opposite to this angle will be this side here, so we can label this the opposite side, and then the adjacent side is the base of this triangle. So the formula we'll want to use is tan x is equal to the opposite over adjacent. So if we substitute the values we've got in our triangle into this equation, it tells us that tan x is equal to 6 divided by 9.5. And what this means is that x is equal to tan to the negative 1 multiplied by 6 over 9.5. And if we put this into our calculator, this tells us that x is equal to 32.2756 and so on. Now this question wants us to give our answer correct to one decimal place. So 32.2756 to one decimal place gives us a value of x, which is 32.3 degrees. And this is our final answer. Now this question's worth 5 marks. We'll get our first 2 marks for correctly using Pythagoras' theorem to work out the length of the triangle on the left. We'll get our 3rd mark for correctly working out the length of the triangle on the right. We'll get our 4th mark for using trigonometry to work out the angle of CDA. And our final mark for correctly working out the angle. Use your calculator to work out the square root of sin 25 plus sin 40 divided by cos 25 minus cos 40. Write down all the figures on your calculator display. So we can put this into our calculator all in one go. And to do this, we first need to press the square root button, and then we want to press the fraction button, which should look something like this. So we want to type in sin 25 plus sin 40. And then if we press the down arrow key, this will take us to the denominator of the fraction. And we can type in cos 25 minus cos 40. And then we press the equals button. And we want to write down all of the figures on our calculator display. And this is 2.75603957. And this question's worth 2 marks. And both of these will be for the correct answer and for writing all the figures on your calculator display. Write your answer to part A correct to 2 decimal places. So our answer to part A is 2.75603957. Now 2 decimal places is between this 5 and 6. However, because 6 is greater than 5, we'll round this 5 up to a 6, which will give us an answer of 2.76. And this question's worth 1 mark, and this is for the correct answer. Yesterday it took 5 cleaners 4.5 hours to clean all the rooms in a hotel. There were only 3 cleaners to clean all the rooms in the hotel today. Each cleaner is paid £8.20 for each hour or part of an hour they work. How much will each cleaner be paid today? So the first thing we need to work out for this question is how long it takes to clean all of the rooms in the hotel in total. So if it took 5 cleaners 4.5 hours to clean all the rooms, then if we do 5 multiplied by 4.5, this will tell us how long it takes in total. So 5 multiplied by 4.5 gives us an answer of 22.5 hours. However, there's only 3 cleaners to clean the rooms today, so in order to work out how much each cleaner will be paid, we need to work out how many hours they worked. So if it takes 22.5 hours in total, and there are 3 cleaners, then to work out their hours we need to do 22.5 divided by 3. And this gives us an answer of 7.5 hours. So each cleaner today did 7.5 hours of work. Now the important piece of information in this question is that each cleaner is paid £8.20 for each hour or part of an hour they work. So this means that even if they do half an hour of work, they'll get paid for the full hour. So what we want to do is we want to round this 7.5 up to 8 hours. And then we're going to want to work out how much they would be paid for 8 hours of work. So to do this we can do 8 multiplied by £8.20, and this gives us an answer of £65.60. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get our first mark for working out how many hours it takes to clean the hotel. We'll get our second mark for working out how many hours the 3 cleaners worked today. And we'll get our third mark for the correct answer. Here is part of a distance time graph for a car's journey. Between which 2 times does the car travel at its greatest speed? Give a reason for your answer. So on a distance time graph, the gradient is equal to the speed of the object. So on this graph, the gradient is equal to the speed of the car. So the steeper the graph, the greater the speed. So on this graph, we're looking for the steepest gradient, which is this section here between 0 and 20. So between which 2 times does the car travel at its greatest speed? So the car travels at its greatest speed between 0 and 20 seconds because the gradient is steepest here. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for stating the correct times and our second mark for explaining why. Work out the greatest speed. So as before, the gradient of this graph is equal to the speed of the car. So in order to work out the greatest speed, we're going to want to work out the gradient between 0 and 20 seconds. So what we can see from this graph is the distance that the car travels in 20 seconds is 360 metres. So our gradient is equal to the change in y divided by the change in x. So the change in y from 0 to 360 is 360, and our change in x from 0 to 20 will be 20. So our gradient will be equal to 360 divided by 20. And if we put this into our calculator, this will give us an answer of 18. And this question's worth 1 mark, and that's for the correct answer. The ratio of the number of people living in Adley to the number of people living in Bridford is given by the ratio of areas of the pie charts. What proportion of the total number of people living in these 2 towns live in Adley and are aged 0 to 19? Give your answer correct to 3 significant figures. The pie charts give information about the ages in years of the people living in two towns, Adley and Bridford. So there are two things we'll need to know for the question. We'll need to know the areas of these two circles, and we'll need to know the angle of this segment here, which is the 0 to 19 segment in Adley. So the first thing we can work out is the area of the two circles. So our area is equal to pi r squared, so the information we'll need from this pie chart is the radius. Now the radius is the distance from the centre of the circle to the edge of the circle. So we can measure any one of these lines. And this should give us an answer of 5 centimetres. And we can do the same for the other circle. And again, using a ruler, this should give us a measurement of 4 centimetres. So the next thing we can do is we can substitute the values into the formula for the area of a circle. So if we start off with Adley, the area will be equal to pi multiplied by 5 squared. And we can put this into our calculator and this will give us an answer of 25 pi. And we can leave this in terms of pi. Next we can move on to Bridford. So again our area will be equal to pi multiplied by the radius squared, which is 4. And this will give us an answer of 16 pi. Now the next piece of information we'll need to know is the angle of this 0 to 19 segment in Adley. So using a protractor, we can work out that this angle is equal to 70 degrees. So now the next thing we'll need to do for this question is work out the area of this 0 to 19 section, as this is proportional to the number of people living in Adley. So the angle is equal to 70 degrees, and there's 360 degrees in a circle in total. So this means the fraction of people who are aged 0 to 19 in Adley will be 70 over 360. So in order to work out the area of this, we're going to want to multiply it by 25 pi. And if we put this into our calculator, it should give us an answer of 15.27. So now the final thing we'll need to do is work out 15.27 as a percentage or decimal of the total area of the two circles. So the first thing we can do is we can work out the area of both circles together. So the area of the pie chart for Adley is 25 pi, and the area of the pie chart for Bridford is 16 pi. So the total area will be equal to 25 pi plus 16 pi, which gives us 41 pi. So now the final thing we need to do is we need to do 15.27 divided by 41 pi, and this gives us an answer of 0.1185, and so on. Now this question wants us to give our answer correct to 3 significant figures, so we're going to want to round 0.1185 up to 0.119. And this is our final answer. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get our first mark for working out the area for both of these pie charts. We'll get the second mark for working out the decimal of people who are aged 0 to 19 living in Adley. And our third mark for the final answer. RS and ST are two sides of a regular 12-sided polygon. RT is a diagonal of the polygon. Work out the size of angle STR. You must show your working. So the first thing we can do for this question is mark on the angle STR so we know which angle we're working out. So angle STR will be this angle here. The next thing we can note for this question is that RS and ST are two sides of a regular 12-sided polygon. Now what this means is that RS is equal in length to ST, which therefore makes triangle SRT an isosceles triangle and tells us that angle STR is equal to angle SRT. So now the next thing we need to know for this question is either the formula for exterior angles of a polygon or the formula for interior angles of a polygon. So the formula for the interior angle of a polygon is the number of sides minus 2 multiplied by 180 divided by the number of sides. So we've been told that this is a 12-sided polygon, and this means that the interior angle will be equal to 12 minus 2 multiplied by 180 divided by 12. And if we put this into our calculator, this will give us an answer of 150 degrees. So because side RS and ST are the two sides of the regular 12-sided polygon, this makes angle RST the interior angle of the polygon, therefore making it equal to 150 degrees. So now with this information we can work out the size of angle STR. So the sum of the angles in a triangle is 180 degrees. So what this means is that 180 minus 150, which is the size of angle RST, will be equal to angle STR plus angle SRT. So we can simplify this down to 30 is equal to angle STR plus angle SRT. Now because angle STR and SRT are equal, this means that angle SRT will be equal to 30 divided by 2, which gives us an answer of 15 degrees. And this is our final answer. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get our first mark for working out the interior angle of the 12-sided polygon. We'll get our second mark for recognising that angle STR is equal to angle SRT and using it to help us work out the angle size. And we'll get our final mark for the correct answer. At the beginning of 2009, Mr. Veal bought a company. The value of the company was £50,000. Each year the value of the company increased by 2%. Calculate the value of the company at the beginning of 2017. Give your answer correct to the nearest £100. So each year the value of the company increased by 2%. So a percentage increase of 2% is the same as multiplying the original value by 1.02. So if we were to work out the value of the company after 1 year, we would want to multiply 50,000 by 1.02. And if we were to work out the value of the company in the second year, we would want to multiply the value of the company at the beginning of 2010 by 1.02 again. Now this is called compound interest. And we could continue this question by multiplying 50,000 by 1.02 8 times, or we could solve it all in one go. So we want to work out the value of the company at the beginning of 2017, which is after 8 years. So an easier way of writing this is 50,000, which is the original value of the company, times by 1.02 to the power of 8. And this is the equivalent of multiplying 50,000 by 1.02 8 times. And this will give us a value of £58,582.97. However, we want our answer correct to the nearest 100, so we can round this up to 58,600. And this is our final answer. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for working out the value of the company after 8 years, and our second mark for giving our answer to the nearest £100. At the beginning of 2009, the value of a different company was £250,000. In 6 years, the value of this company increased to £325,000. This is the equivalent to an increase of X% each year. Find the value of X. Give your answer correct to 2 significant figures. So we can use a similar structure which we used in Part A for compound interest. And this is that the final value of the company is equal to the original value of the company times by the multiplier for the percentage change to the power of the years. So we can substitute the values which we've been given in this question into this formula. So the final value of the company is £325,000. The original value of the company is £250,000. And if we let y be equal to the multiplier for the percentage change, then we can multiply 250,000 by y, and then the number of years is 6 years. And now what we're going to want to do is simplify down this equation to make y the subject. So the first thing we're going to want to do is divide both sides by 250,000. So 325,000 divided by 250,000 gives us an answer of 13/10. And this will be equal to y to the power of 6. And now in order to get y on its own on one side, we're going to want to do the sixth root of both sides. And if we put this into our calculator, this tells us that y is equal to 1.0447. Now 1.0447 is the multiplier for the percentage change. So we want to convert this to a percentage. So if the multiplier is 1.0447, this will be equal to 104.47%. So what this means is the value after 1 year will be 104.47% of the original value. However, we want to work out the percentage increase. So in order to do this, we want to minus 100 from this answer. And this tells us that the percentage increase is 4.47%. Now we want to give our answer correct to two significant figures, so we want to round this up to 4.5%. And this is our final answer. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get 1 mark for working out the multiplier for the 6 years, which is 13/10. Our second mark for working out the multiplier for 1 year, and our third mark for the correct percentage increase. On the grid, shade the region that satisfies all these inequalities. Label the region R. So the first thing we're going to want to do is draw each of these 3 lines onto this graph. Now in order to do this, we're going to want to change the inequality signs to equal signs. So this tells us that y will be equal to 1, x plus y will be equal to 5, and y will be equal to 2x. So if we first start off with y equals 1, and now the line where y will always be equal to 1 will look like this. Now the second equation, x plus y equals 5, what we can do is we can substitute some values into this. So when x is equal to 0, 0 plus y will be equal to 5, and therefore when x equals 0, y will be equal to 5. So we can mark this point onto our grid. And we can do the same for when y will be equal to 0. So when y equals 0, x plus 0 will be equal to 5. So again, we can mark this point on the graph. So we now have 2 points, so we can draw a straight line between these 2 points. And we can use the same process for the line y equals 2x. So again, we can choose 2 values to substitute into this equation. So if we start off with x equals 0, when x equals 0, y will be equal to 2 multiplied by 0. So y will be equal to 0. So next we can substitute x equals 2 into this equation. So when x equals 2, y equals 2 multiplied by 2. So therefore y equals 4. And again we can plot this point on our grid. And using a ruler we can join up these points. So we've drawn on all the lines we need to draw onto this grid. So now the final thing we need to do is work out which region is R. So the first inequality we've been given is y is greater than 1. So the region in which y is greater than 1 will be anywhere above the line y equals 1. The second inequality, x plus y is less than 5. Well, if we choose the point 1, 3, then x plus y will be equal to 4, and therefore x plus y will be less than 5. So the region in which x plus y is less than 5 will be this region below here. Now the final inequality, y is greater than 2x. We can use the same process as before. So if we choose the point 1, 3, and we can substitute these values in, and this will give us 3 is greater than 2 multiplied by 1. So we can therefore work out that the region in which y is greater than 2x is this region over here. So because of this, the region which satisfies all of these inequalities is this region here. And we need to label this region, region R. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get our first and second mark for correctly drawing in all 3 lines. And we'll get our third mark for correctly shading in region R. Tracy is going to choose a main course and a dessert in a cafe. She can choose from 8 main courses and 7 desserts. Tracy says that to work out the number of different ways of choosing a main course and a dessert, you add 8 and 7. Is Tracy correct? You must give a reason for your answer. So if we think about this question, if there are 8 main courses and 7 desserts, then if we choose the first main course on the menu, we will still be able to choose between 7 desserts. And again, if we take the second main course from the menu, we'll still have 7 ways of choosing the dessert, and so on. So is Tracy correct? No, Tracy is not correct, because she should multiply 8 and 7 rather than add them. "12 teams play in a competition. Each team plays each other team exactly once. Work out the total number of games played." So if there are 12 teams playing in this competition, and each team plays each other team exactly once, then this means that each team will play 11 games in total. Now the reason it's not 12 is because the teams won't be playing themselves. So what we want to do next is 12 multiplied by 11, which gives us an answer of 132. Now this may look like the correct answer, but there's one more step we need to do. Now if we think about it, because there are 2 teams in each game, we have effectively double counted each of these games. So in order to work out the total number of games played, we want to divide our answer by 2, and this gives us an answer of 66. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for starting a method to work out the total number of games played, and our second mark for the correct answer. Solve x minus 2 squared equals 3. Give your solutions correct to 3 significant figures. Now there's a few different ways of doing this question. You could either expand out these brackets and then use the quadratic formula, or we can rearrange this like a normal equation, so by getting x on its own on one side. So when rearranging, the first thing we'll want to do is square root both sides so that we can get rid of this squared sign. So the square root of x minus 2 squared will give us x minus 2, and the square root of 3 will give us plus or minus root 3. Now this plus or minus is really important for this question, as it means we get 2 solutions. And in order to get the most accurate answer, it's best to leave your answer in surds until the end. So the next thing we'll want to do is add 2 to both sides. So x minus 2 plus 2 will give us x, and then plus or minus root 3 plus 2 will give us 2 plus or minus root 3. So what this means is that x equals 2 plus root 3, and x also equals 2 minus root 3. And now the final thing we need to do is put these two values into our calculator so that we can give our solutions correct to 3 significant figures. So 2 plus root 3 is equal to 3.732 and so on. And 2 minus root 3 is equal to 0.2679 and so on. And these answers correct to 2 significant figures tells us that x is equal to 3.73 and x is equal to 0.268. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for beginning to rearrange this equation and our second mark for the correct answers. The table gives information about the heights of 150 students. On the grid, draw a histogram for this information. So in order to draw this histogram, we'll need to work out what the frequency density for this table of information is. So the frequency density is equal to the frequency divided by the interval. So what we can do is we can add an extra column to this table and then work out the frequency density for these 5 pieces of information. So if we start off with the top one, we have a frequency of 15 and then the interval between the heights 140 and 150 will be 10. So our frequency density is equal to 15 divided by 10, which gives us 1.5. For our second piece of information, we have a frequency of 30 and our heights are between 150 and 155 centimetres, meaning we have an interval of 5. So our frequency density will be 30 divided by 5. And this gives us an answer of 6. And we can continue this for the rest of the table. So 51 divided by 5 gives us an answer of 10.2. 36 divided by 5 gives us an answer of 7.2. And then 18 divided by 15 gives us an answer of 1.2. So now what we need to do is draw the information onto this histogram. So the first thing we can do is label our axes. So our x-axis will be the height in centimetres, and our y-axis will be our frequency density. Next we'll need to work out a suitable scale for both the x and y axis of this histogram. So if we start off with our frequency density, the values for our frequency density are between 1.2 and 10.2. So a suitable scale would be that every 5 squares is equal to a frequency density of 1. Next, the height. So we have heights ranging from 140 centimetres to 180 centimetres. So a suitable scale for this would be that every square is equal to 1 centimetre, so therefore every 10 squares would be equal to 10 centimetres. And we can start at 140 centimetres. So now the next thing we need to do is fill in this histogram. Now the way a histogram works is the area of each of the bars will be equal to the frequency. So this is a good way to check that our histogram is correct. So if we start off with the first piece of information, we have heights between 140 and 150 centimetres and a frequency density of 1.5. And when we draw it onto our table, it should look something like this. Next we have the heights between 150 and 155 centimetres and a frequency density of 6, so our bar should look something like this. Next we have a frequency density of 10.2, heights between 155 and 160 centimetres. And the bar should look something like this. heights between 160 and 165 centimetres, and a frequency density of 7.2. And then finally, heights between 165 and 180 centimetres with a frequency density of 1.2 should look like this. And this is our completed histogram. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get our first and second mark for correctly filling out the histogram, and our third mark for correctly labelling the axes. Work out an estimate for the fraction of students who have a height between 150 centimetres and 170 centimetres. So for a histogram, the area is equal to the frequency. So in order to estimate the fraction of students with heights between 150 centimetres and 170 centimetres, we'll need to work out the area for the bars between 150 and 170 centimetres. Now in the question we're told that there are 150 students, and this is important to note down in order to estimate the fraction of students. So in our table we've already been told the number of students which are between 150 centimetres and 165 centimetres. So our frequency for the interval between 150 and 155 centimetres has been given to us as 30. Between 155 and 160 centimetres we've been told is 51 students. And finally between 160 and 165 we've been told that there are 36 students. So now the final thing we need to do is work out the area of this bar between 165 and 170 centimetres. Now there's 2 ways of doing this. Because the area between 165 and 170 centimetres is exactly a third of the whole area of this bar between 165 and 180 centimetres, we can either divide our frequency by 3 or multiply our interval by our frequency density. So our interval is 5 and our frequency density is 1.2. So this gives us an answer of 6. So now the final thing we need to do is add together these 4 values. And this gives us an answer of 123. So 123 is an estimate for the number of students with a height between 150 and 170 centimetres. However, we want this as a fraction. So if there's 150 students in total, then 123 as a fraction of the total number of students will be 123 over 150. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for working out the number of students between 150 and 170 centimetres, and our second mark for the correct answer. At time t equals 0 hours, a tank is full of water. Water leaks from the tank. At the end of every hour there is 2% less water in the tank than at the start of the hour. The volume of water in litres in the tank at time t hours is Vt. Given that V0 equals 2000, Vt plus 1 equals k multiplied by Vt, write down the value of k. So what we can do for this question is we can substitute our value for V0, which we've been given in the question, into the formula below. So what this tells us is that V0 plus 1 is equal to k multiplied by V0. So V0 plus 1 will be equal to V1, which is equal to the volume of water in litres after 1 hour. And this is equal to k multiplied by 2000, which is the value for V0 which we've been given. Now what we've been told in the question is at the end of every hour there is 2% less water in the tank than at the start. So if after 0 hours there are 2000 litres in the tank, then this means at 1 hour there will be 2% less water in the tank than there was at 0 hours. And 2% less can be worked out by multiplying a number by 0.98. So what this means is that our value for k will be 0.98. Because if we multiply 2000 by 0.98, this will give us a 2% decrease and therefore give us the value for V1. And this question's worth 1 mark, and that's for the correct answer. A triangle has vertices P, Q and R. The coordinates of P are -3, -6. The coordinates of Q are 1, 4. The coordinates of R are 5, -2. M is the midpoint of PQ. N is the midpoint of QR. Prove that MN is parallel to PR. You must show each stage of your working. So the first thing we're going to want to do is draw out the triangle PQR so that we can visualise our workings. So if this is our triangle PQR, then the coordinates of P are -3, -6. The coordinates of Q are 1, 4. And then the coordinates of R are 5, -2. Next we can mark M and N onto our triangle. So M is the midpoint of PQ. So our line PQ is this line here. So M will be roughly here. And then N is the midpoint of QR. And our line QR is this line here. So N will be around here. So we're trying to prove that line MN is parallel to line PR. Now one way to do this is to prove that their gradients are the same. So in order to do this, we'll need to work out what the coordinates of M and N are. So the sum of the two x terms divided by 2 and then the sum of the y terms divided by 2 gives us the midpoint of a line. So this means that the midpoint of line QP will be equal to 1 plus -3 divided by 2 and then 4 plus -6 divided by 2. And if we work this out, this gives us an x coordinate of -1 and a y coordinate of -1. So we therefore know that coordinate M is -1, -1. Next we can move on to point N. So point N is the midpoint of line QR. So we can use the same process as before. The x coordinate will be equal to 1 plus 5 divided by 2. And the y coordinate will be equal to 4 plus -2 divided by 2. And this gives us an x coordinate of 3 and a y coordinate of 1. Now the next thing we need to do in order to prove that line MN is parallel to line PR is work out the gradients of the two lines. So y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1 gives us the gradient, which is the same as writing change in y over change in x. So if we start off with line MN, our first y coordinate is -1 and our second y coordinate is 1. And then our first x coordinate is -1 and our second x coordinate is 3. So we can substitute this into the formula for the gradient. So this tells us that the gradient for MN is 1 minus -1 divided by 3 minus -1. And this gives us an answer of a half. Next line PR. So our first y term will be -6, our second y term will be -2, and then our first x term will be -3, and our second x term will be 5. And if we substitute this into the gradient formula, this will give us -2 minus -6 divided by 5 minus -3. And again, if we work this out, this gives us an answer of a half. Now what we can see is that both gradients for line MN and line PR are the same. So we've therefore proven that MN is parallel to PR. So the final thing we'll want to do is write a summary statement. So we can write something along the lines of line MN and PR are parallel because they both have a gradient of a half. Now this question's worth 4 marks. We'll get our first mark for working out the coordinates of both M and N. We'll get our second mark for starting to work out the gradient of line MN and PR. We'll get our third mark for working out the correct gradient. And our final mark for the conclusion with the supporting evidence. OAC is a sector of a circle, centre O, radius 10 metres. BA is the tangent to the circle at point A. BC is the tangent to the circle at point C. Angle AOC equals 120 degrees. Calculate the area of the shaded region. Give your answer correct to 3 significant figures. So the first thing we need to know for this question is that tangents to a circle are always at a right angle to the radius of the circle. And because both BA and BC are tangents to the circle, this means that angle BAO and angle BCO are both right angles. So we can mark this onto our diagram. Now what we can see is we've got a kite shape here. Now kites are quadrilaterals, and all angles in a quadrilateral sum to 360 degrees. So what this means is angle ABC is equal to 360 minus 90 minus 90 minus 120. And this gives us an answer of 60 degrees. So again we can mark this onto our diagram. So the way to do this question is to minus the area of the sector from the area of the total quadrilateral. So the first thing we'll want to do is work out the area of the quadrilateral. Now the best way to do this is to split the quadrilateral in half to form 2 right-angled triangles. Now what this means is angle ABO up here will be half the size of what it was, making it 30 degrees. And angle BAO will again be half the size, making it 60 degrees. Now in order to work out the area, we'll need to know another side length. So we can use SOHCAHTOA to work this out. So as we can see, the side we'll want to work out is side AB, because with this we can use the formula a half base times height to work out the total area. So our hypotenuse is always the longest side, and then if we use the 60 degree angle here, this will make length AB side O, and therefore making side AO A. So when using tan x, where x is the angle, is equal to opposite over adjacent. So what we can see, the opposite side is the side we want to work out, and we already have the adjacent side. So we can substitute in our values. So the angle we're using is 60, so this means tan 60 is equal to opposite over 10. Which means that length AB will be equal to 10 multiplied by tan 60. And if we put this into our calculator, this tells us that our opposite side is equal to 10 root 3. So we can mark this onto our diagram. Now both of these triangles are exactly the same. They're just reflected down this centre line. So if we work out the area of this left triangle here, we can double it to work out the area of the full quadrilateral. So the area of the triangle is equal to a half base times height. So the length of our base is 10 metres and the length of our height is 10 root 3 metres. So this means our area is equal to a half multiplied by 10 multiplied by 10 root 3. And this gives us a total of 50 root 3 metres squared. So we'll want to double our value for the area of the triangle, and if we put this into our calculator, this gives us a value of 173.21 metres squared. Now the next part of this question is working out the area of this sector. Now there's 360 degrees in a full circle, however this angle is 120 degrees. So what this means is this sector is exactly a third of a full circle. So if we divide the formula for the area of a circle by 3, this will give us the area of this sector. So the area of a circle is equal to pi r squared, which means that the area of this sector will be equal to pi r squared divided by 3. So our radius has been given to us as 10, so this means the area of sector AOC will be equal to pi multiplied by 10 squared divided by 3. And this gives us an answer of 104.72 metres squared. So now the final thing we need to do is minus the area of the sector from the area of the quadrilateral. So the shaded area of this shape is equal to the area of the quadrilateral minus the area of the sector. So if we substitute in the values which we worked out, our value for the area of the quadrilateral was 173.21, and the area for the sector was 104.72. And if we put this into our calculator, this gives us an answer of 68.49. And now the final thing we need to do is give our answer correct to 3 significant figures. So we're going to want to round 68.49 up to 68.5. And this is our final answer. Now this question's worth 5 marks. We'll get our first mark for showing that either angle BAO or BCO are 90 degrees. We'll get our second mark for working out the length of side AB. We'll get our third mark for working out the area of one of the triangles. We'll get our fourth mark for working out the area of the sector. And our fifth mark for the correct answer. There are 12 counters in a bag. There is an equal number of red counters, blue counters and yellow counters in the bag. There are no other counters in the bag. 3 counters are taken at random from the bag. Work out the probability of taking 3 red counters. So the first thing we'll want to note for this question is there is an equal number of red counters, blue counters and yellow counters in the bag. So if there are 12 counters in total, this means that there are 4 red counters, 4 blue counters and 4 yellow counters in the bag. Now the number we're interested in is the number of red counters, so we can write this down. Now because these 3 counters are being taken consecutively, we're going to want to multiply the probabilities. So initially we've worked out that there are 4 red counters in the bag and there are 12 counters in the bag in total. So the probability of taking out a red counter will be 4 over 12. So assuming that we've just taken 1 red counter out of the bag, this means there will only be 3 red counters left in the bag. And if we've taken 1 away from the total, this means there will be 11 counters left in the bag. Now again we can now assume that we've taken 2 red counters out of the bag, meaning there will only be 2 red counters left out of a total of 10 in the bag. And if we put this calculation into our calculator, this gives us a probability of 1 over 55. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for doing the correct calculation, and our second mark for the correct probability. The 3 counters are put back into the bag. Some more counters are now put into the bag. There is still an equal number of red counters, blue counters and yellow counters in the bag. There are no counters of any other colour in the bag. 3 counters are taken at random from the bag. Is it now less likely or equally likely or more likely that the 3 counters will be red? You must show how you get your answer. So we've been told in the question that there is still an equal number of red counters, blue counters and yellow counters in the bag. Now what we need to know from part A is that the probability was 1 over 55. Now the best way to do this question would be to double the amount of counters in the bag and then compare our new calculated probability. So there were 4 red counters in total before, and if we times this by 2, this gives us 8 counters. And if there were 12 counters in total from the previous question, and we times this by 2, this tells us that there are 24 counters in total. So now what we need to do is work out our probability. So if there are 8 red counters in total out of 24 counters, then as before we're going to want to assume that we took out a red counter, so therefore minus 1 off both the numerator and the denominator. So we're going to want to multiply 8 over 24 by 7 over 23. And we've taken 3 counters out of the bag. So again we're going to want to assume that we've taken 2 red counters out of the bag and multiply this by 6 over 22. And this gives us an answer of 7 over 253. And if we convert this to a decimal, this gives us an answer of 0.028. Now 1 over 55 as a decimal is 0.018. And it's useful to have both of our answers in decimals so that we can compare them. So as you can see, 0.028 is greater than 0.018. So therefore, we are now more likely to choose out 3 red counters. So the final thing we need to do is write a summary statement. So we can write something along the lines of, it is now more likely that 3 counters will be red, because 0.018 is less than 0.028. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for choosing a larger value for the number of counters in the bag, and we'll get our second mark for our summary statement, in which we stated that we are now more likely to have 3 counters that are red. The functions f and g are such that f of x equals 5x plus 3, g of x equals ax plus b, where a and b are constants, g of 3 equals 20, and the inverse of f of 33 equals g of 1. Find the value of a and the value of b. So the first thing we can start off with is work out what the inverse of f of x is equal to. So f of x equals 5x plus 3. So from x, in order to get to 5x, we have multiplied x by 5. And in order to get from 5x to 5x plus 3, we've added 3. So in order to work out the inverse of f of x, we're going to want to minus 3 and then divide by 5. So what this means is the inverse of f of x is equal to x minus 3 all divided by 5. So now what we can do is we can work out the inverse of f of 33. So now what we're going to want to do is substitute 33 into the inverse function which we've just worked out. And 33 minus 3 is 30, and then 30 divided by 5 gives us 6. So if the inverse of f of 33 is equal to 6, then this means g of 1 will also be equal to 6. So we can substitute the value of x equals 1 into this function, and this tells us that 6 is equal to a multiplied by 1 plus b, which means that 6 equals a plus b. Now the next piece of information we've been told is that g of 3 equals 20. So as before, we can substitute the value x equals 3 into this function. And this means that g of 3 is equal to a multiplied by 3 plus b, which means that g of 3 equals 3a plus b. And because g of 3 equals 20, then this means that 20 is equal to 3a plus b. Now what we can see here is we have 2 variables a and b, and we've formed 2 different equations. So what we can do is form a set of simultaneous equations. So we can let this be equation 1 and this be equation 2. And what we're going to do is equation 1 minus equation 2. So 20 minus 6 gives us 14. 3a minus a gives us 2a. And then b minus b gives us 0. And then if we divide both sides by 2, this tells us that a is equal to 7. So now the final thing we need to do is substitute the value of 7 which we've worked out into one of the original equations. So if we use the equation 6 equals a plus b, then this means 6 is equal to 7 plus b. Now we can minus 7 from both sides, and this tells us that b is equal to negative 1. And these values for a and b are our final answer. Now this question's worth 5 marks. We'll get our first mark for using a process to find the inverse of f of x. We'll get our second mark for substituting the value of x equals 33 into our equation which we worked out for the inverse of f of x. We'll get our third mark for forming an equation from g of 1. We'll get our fourth mark for forming an equation from g of 3. And our final mark for working out the correct values for a and b. S is a geometric sequence. Given that root x minus 1, 1 and root x plus 1 are the first 3 terms of S, find the value of x. You must show all your working. So the first thing we need to know for this question is what a geometric sequence is. So a geometric sequence is a sequence in which each term is multiplied by a common ratio to give the next term. So an example of this is the sequence 1, 3, 9 and 27, in which each term is multiplied by 3 to give the next term. So now with this knowledge we can start working out the question. So we've been told that term 1 is root x minus 1. We've been told that term 2 is 1, and then term 3 is root x plus 1. So if we let k be our common ratio, then this means that root x minus 1 multiplied by k gives us 1. And then 1 multiplied by k gives us root x plus 1. So we can form an equation from these. So if we start with term 1 and 2, we've just worked out that root x minus 1 multiplied by k will give us the second term, which is 1. So now in order to work out the value of x, we're going to want to substitute something in place of this k here. So if we look at the second and third term and use a similar process, then this tells us that 1 multiplied by k will be equal to root x plus 1. And 1 multiplied by k is equal to k. So now what we can do is we can substitute root x plus 1 in place of this k here. And this gives us that root x minus 1 multiplied by root x plus 1 is equal to 1. And if we simplify this down, then root x multiplied by root x gives us x. Root x multiplied by 1 gives us root x. Negative 1 multiplied by root x gives us negative root x. And then negative 1 multiplied by 1 gives us negative 1. And this is all equal to 1. And we can cancel out these two middle root x terms, because root x minus root x gives us 0. And this tells us that x minus 1 is equal to 1. And if we add 1 to both sides, this tells us that x is equal to 2. And this is our final answer. Now this question's worth 3 marks. We'll get our first mark for forming the equation from the sequence, our second mark for substituting in x plus 1 in place of the k, and our third mark for the correct answer. Show that the fifth term of s is 7 plus 5 root 2. So in part A of the question, we were told that term 1 is root x minus 1, term 2 is 1, and then term 3 is root x plus 1. And we worked out that x was equal to 2. So this means that term 1 is equal to root 2 minus 1, term 2 is equal to 1, term 3 is equal to root 2 plus 1, and then we don't know term 4 and 5. However, what we do know is to get from one term to the next, we need to multiply the term by a common ratio, which we labelled k. So in part A, we said that k was equal to root x plus 1. And if we worked out that x was equal to 2, then this means that k was equal to root 2 plus 1. So what this means is that root 2 minus 1 multiplied by root 2 plus 1 gives us 1, and then 1 multiplied by root 2 plus 1 is equal to root 2 plus 1. Now what it also means is to get from term 3 to 4, we need to multiply root 2 plus 1 by root 2 plus 1. So this means that term 4 is equal to root 2 plus 1 multiplied by root 2 plus 1. Now we can either work this out on our calculator or do it by hand. And if we don't use a calculator, the way we're going to do this is first multiply root 2 by root 2, which gives us 2. Root 2 multiplied by 1 gives us root 2. 1 multiplied by root 2 gives us root 2. And then 1 multiplied by 1 gives us 1. And if we simplify this down, this gives us 2 root 2 plus 3. And this is our fourth term. So now we can use the same process to get from term 4 to term 5. So term 5 will be equal to term 4, which is 2 root 2 plus 3, multiplied by our common ratio, which is root 2 plus 1. So we can use the same process as before. So 2 root 2 multiplied by root 2 will give us 2 multiplied by 2. 2 root 2 multiplied by 1 will give us 2 root 2. 3 multiplied by root 2 gives us plus 3 root 2, and then 3 multiplied by 1 gives us 3. So 2 multiplied by 2 gives us 4, 2 root 2 plus 3 root 2 gives us 5 root 2 plus 3, and if we simplify this down, this gives us 7 plus 5 root 2. And this is the value which they wanted us to prove that the fifth term was equal to. Now this question's worth 2 marks. We'll get our first mark for using the common ratio to work out one of the following terms, and our second mark for showing that the fifth term is 7 plus 5 root 2 with the supporting evidence.